Bright morning, everyone. We are the group one. So, for our lesson for today, we're going to discuss the global economy and market integration. So, under the global economy, we're going to discuss the following: the economic globalization, problems arising due to economic development, global economic structures, who are the actors to facilitate economic globalization, and the Wallerstein's modern world system. But before we proceed to the economic globalization, let me first introduce myself. So I am Rovi Marian Arojado from BTL Ed HE-3A. So economic globalization. Before we define what is economic globalization, let us first know what is economic. So economic, it is a study of how people, businesses, and nation use the resources to produce, distribute, and consume goods and services. While globalization naman, this is the interconnectedness or the interdependence among countries. So it involves the exchanging of ideas, culture, technology, goods, services, and even people across borders. So let us know what is economic globalization. So economic globalization is a historical process representing the result of human innovation and technological progress. So when we say human innovation, these are the process of creating new ideas, methods, or tools that helps improve the lives of people. So for example, 'di ba, ang stove subong nga ginagamit ta is using electrical or ang fuel. But sa unang ila gina-use is mga woods para makaluto sa ila ginakaon. So we have the technological progress. So it refers to the discovery of new and improved methods of producing goods. So economic globalization has led to the free flow of trade, investment, and ideas across nations. So, because of this, event in one country can directly affect others, showing how interconnected our world has become. So, for example, the conflict between Iran and Israel. So, di ba, ang experience sa to nga nabalitaan ta to nga ang Iran and Israel has a conflict, may war between two countries. So, even though the Philippines is not directly involved, we can still feel the effects, especially sa fuel. So, cause Iran is known as one of the major source of fuel. So, gakaapektuhan kita. We experience ang pagtaas ang price sang fuel not only here in the Philippines but also in other countries. That proves our economy is interconnected with global events. So what happens in one part of the world can affect our daily lives. So let us now proceed to the historical process. It had its beginnings and reached its peak in 1994. So it starts on 16th to 18th century. So it started with a global trade, with the age of exploration, the colonization and opening of trade routes connected Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So for example, ang the galleon trade between the Philippines and Mexico. So it reached its peak in 1994. So dili na established ang the World Trade Organization or the WTO, that is an intergovernmental organization that regulates and facilitates international trade. So WTO encourage free trade and stronger connection between countries. So sa subong nga panahon is we gaka-experience naman gyapon ang trading, no, but with the use of technology na, with the use of internet, smartphones, or mga gadgets. So next slide please. So in human innovation, we have the two revolution. We have the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. So let us first tackle the scientific revolution. So the scientific revolution starts in 16th to 17th century. They're focused on the discovery of new knowledge, particularly in science and mathematics. Their key features are shifts from relying on religion and tradition to using reasons, experimentation, and observation. More advances in astronomy, physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics. So, in the scientific revolution, diri ni na-invent ang mga tools like, ang tools and equipments like telescope, microscope, compass, and barometer to improve navigation, medicines, and communication. So, how did the inventions from the scientific revolution like the telescope and compass help in global trade? So the inventions from the scientific revolution helped the global trade by making the sea voyages and more accurate and safe. So with better navigation, explorers could travel farther and connect countries through trade. So next slide please. So in industrial revolution naman we have its time frame, 18th to 19th century. It focuses on the application of scientific knowledge to technology, industry, and production. We have its key features, invention of machines that replace manual labor. So, ang mga machineries na ginagamit sa mga industries or factories, the development of factories and mass production, the rise of steam engines, textile mills, ironworks, railways, and mechanized farming, shifts from agrarian economies to industrial and urban economies. So when we say agrarian economies, this is an economy that is dependent both on farming and raising of animals. Tapos nag-shift siya into industrial and urban economies. Next slide, please. So we have the technological progress of economic globalization. First, we have the transportation. So, 'di ba sa unang transportation ta is very hinay kaayo cause we use animals like ang mga karabaw or mga kabayo which took us pila ka days or several months para makaabot sa aton destination. But for today nga advanced na kayo ang technology, we use mga motor, cars, mga airplanes which mas gapadali sa aton kung diin ta gusto magkadto. So the next one we have the communication. Sa una, we use letters or any other form nga mga ng arang maka-communicate ta sa aton loved ones, but it took several months or several days para makaabot sa ilang aton mga letters nga ginapadala. But today with the use of technology or the advancements of technology, we can use internet, may ara na ta smartphones, gadgets nga mas mapadali ang aton pag-communication, mas mapadali aton communication sa aton loved ones or mga friends naton nga duara lang sila sa aton tupad even though layo sila sa aton. So we have the capitals. So sa una, money moved through physical coins, barter or slow banking system. But today, ara na ta sa digital banking, may ara na ta use na ta credit cards, online transfer, and global investments nga gahappen lang within a second or a minute. Next slide, please. So, it is characterized by the increasing integration of economies around the world through the movement of goods, services, and capital across the borders. So the country's economies are becoming more connected because of goods, services, and money move across borders faster than before. Mas madasig subong ang mas padasig subong ang ato no pag trade sa iban nga countries because of the use of technology, unlike sa una nga kadugay because hinay pa kaayo or wala pa ta kaayo improvement when it comes to technology. So we have the increasing integration, the increased trade, and supercomputers. So increasing integrations, What does it mean? So countries trade and cooperate more closely with each other. So for example, the Philippines export bananas to Japan, and then in return, ma-import ang Japan cars and electronics. So both economies benefit because they share products. So supercomputers. So supercomputers, they help companies manage trade, production, and logistic worldwide. So for example, we have the ang ano subo ang trending, which is ang online ang online shopping apps like Shopee's or Lazada, Amazon. So they are using supercomputers no para ma-process ang mga millions of orders within seconds across different countries. So we have the high frequency trading, millions of stocks, purchases, and sales between different cities in a matter of seconds. So using advanced computers to buy and sell millions of stocks or share of a companies in just a fraction of a second. So it makes financial markets more connected and faster than ever before. So for example, just like when you reload your Gcash and money shows up instantly. So in the stock market, billions can move instantly across countries. Next slide, please.
These in new tools or inventions. So people are the individuals who create and influence and or implement changes. So they are the one who create. So when we say organizations are the group of people working together for a specific purpose. For example, business, charities, as long as it's a group of people that working together for a purpose. So next is the institutions. It is established organizations or systems with a formal structure and purpose. When we say formal structure, it can be governments, school, or hospitals. So when lastly is the technologies. So technologies, it can be a new inventions, or it can be a tools or methods that drive or enable changes. So when we create a product, so of course in a modern day, it can be use of some technologies or robots, machine, that is a method or medium for making a product. So critical to economic globalization is global economic integration. So when we say economic integration, means that separate production operations are functionally related to each other and form a unified product or service. So economic integration means different countries or companies work together to produce a product or service. So they might be involved in different stages of production, but their efforts are connected and dependent on each other. For example, the Apple or the iPad. It is usually designed in US, but it was assembled in China. So they are different country. They are different country and different company. But they are still working together to create a technology or product. So in current times, this is made possible by innovations in transport logistics. When we say transport logistics, it is a goods can be shipped quickly, efficiently across the globe. So all the materials or products that came from different countries or other countries, it can be shipped into another country by this transport logistics. So next is the modernization of communication. So if of course modernization of communication, we can call or communicate to other people in other country by using our technologies or telephone, cell phone. So as the companies can collaborate and communicate easily. So with the use of modernization of communications, some companies to other country, they can communicate. So if they want collaboration in creating a new product. So and transport systems, policies, supporting integration of different processes along the globe, among others. So, as the government create policies that support international trade and cooperation. So, government have a lot of policies that can be support the the logistic transport system, or mga policies that nang support international trade and cooperation for as long as the product can be created, because of that they are different countries, different companies, but still they are working together because of the modernization of communication and some policies of the government, and also the logistic partners, or some logistic transportation logistics.
So now let's proceed to the problem arising due to economic development. But before that, let me first introduce myself. I am Roan B. Alabastro from Detail Ed HE-3A. Next slide, please. Economic development refers to the sustained process of improving the economic well-being and quality of life for a country or religion's population. It encompasses not only the growth of nations' gross domestic product or GDP, but also advancement in increase such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, and environment sustainability. So when we say economic development, it is true that economic development aims to create a more equitable distribution of wealth, reduce poverty, and expand opportunities for all citizens. So this involves fostering innovation, attracting investment, and implementing policies that promotes long-term prosperity while safeguarding the environment and social fabric. Next slide, please. So, let's discuss what are the things nga gakwan sa economic development. So, subjugation of poor nations. So, what do you mean by subjugations? So, it is like a group takes control over another and force them to do they are told. So gina-force nila ang iba nga maghimo sa gusto nila nga obrahon. So subjugation is one of many types of injustice in the world. So it has to do with one group of people dominating other group by taking away their freedom. So poor nations are often subjugated by the operations of the global economy. This can occur through various mechanisms. So first is ang trade imbalance. So in trade imbalance, are na this sa for example, um a developing African nation exporting a cocoa beans at low price to a developed European country, which then imports the finished chocolate products of much higher prices. So, parehas man na wala sa gagas. Katong tutunan. Shish. Katong ko na lang sa trade imbalance. So first, let's discuss the trade imbalance. So for example, is a developing African nation exporting cocoa beans at a low price to a developed European country, which then imports the finished chocolate product of much higher prices. So much ga earn ang nagbaligya sang finish na daan nga product except ay mas naga-earn ang nagabaligya sang finish nga product kesa sa mga naga-produce sang product because ang na-finish nga product is ibaligya na lang nila, so ang ano ya ang ga-produce yung product na damo pa process nga again. So for example, another one sa pag ano ta sang tubo, 'di ba? It's sugar cane. So gakuha ta sa mga kuan sa tubuhan, sugar cane. Pag abot sa central, dira na nila i-process ang sugar. So ibaligya na lang nila. So that That's the trade imbalance. Next is the explosion of labor. So explosion of labor. So this is an example of explosion of a labor. So example of multi-nation cooperation exploiting cheap labor in the Nike sweatshop in Indonesia. These factories, located near slums, target poor desperate workers, creating conditions of abuse and explosion. So this one naman niya is, for example, ka-create lang sila nagka-create ng product which is hindi man kinahanglanon sang mga tawo. Kag ang ina-target na ding gina-create nila product is ang mga poor people which is nga kinahanglan gid ang obra. So next slide please. So let's now discuss the unequal distribution of gains. So first is the historical factors. So colonialisms and other forms of historical exploitation have left many poor nations at a disadvantage in a global economy. So yeah, right kay sang una nga panahon ang colonialism gihatag gid sa big impact sa subong nga generation because colonialism and other forms of historical exploitations have disadvantage to poor countries in a global economy, resulting in a problem such as unequal access of education, health, employment, as well as the emergence of debt, social conflicts, and poverty. Next, please. So, lack of infrastructure. So, poor nations often lack the infrastructure and institutions needed to compete effectively in the global economy. So, an example ng lack of infrastructure is if a nation's rural farmers lack goods, roads, and a market access, their agriculture products cannot be efficiently transported, leading to low productivity and unlimited integrations into the global food supply chains. So now it's right now that lack of infrastructure makakuha gid sa saton or makakuha gid sa saton sang pagkaon. For example, sa example ko gina na um, sa mga farmers if maghatag sila sa aton food if ang lugar if ang butangan nila lugar or ang alagyan sang lugar sang food is ng lack of infrastructure, so mabudlayan kita makakuha sang aton nga product or sa aton nga pagkaon. Next. So, in debt payment, when poor nations are forced to repay debts to more developed countries, the burden often falls disparately on the poor. This can happen because of the austerity measure, diversion of resources, increase of poverty. So it's true that if mangurakot ang marungak, ma kor ano gali makor ay makorrupt ta nga makorrupt ang bayad or ang gakaiguan is ang poor ones magyapon, just like lang sa gibalita sang last week about sa mga kurakot nga ginabrag nila ang ilang mga ang sa ilang mga bata, but unfortunately the poor one will suffer magyapon. So first one is the austerity measure. To repay debts, nations and implement austerity measures that cut social spending and raise taxes, disproportionately affecting the poor. So it refers to a government policies that involves increasing taxes or cutting public spending, or both to reduce a budget deficit and a public debt, often after a financial crisis. Sa diversion of resources naman niya, debt repayment can divert resources from essential services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure, hindering poverty reduction efforts. So in Diversion of resources, debt repayment can diverse critical funds from a nation's ability to the essentials public service like healthcare, education, infrastructure, therapy. So, sila niya ang gahatag sa mga, um, for example, sa healthcare, education, sila na ang gahatag sa mga needs sang schools or sang healthcare with our taxes. Dapat dira lada kadto. Next one is increased poverty. The combination of austerity measures and reduced social spending can lead to increased poverty and equality. So, austerity measures which reduce government spending and combined with decreased social spending come indeed increase poverty. So it's true. And inequality by cutting essentials public service like healthcare and education, leading to fewer job opportunities and weakened action safety, particularly impacting vulnerable population. So it will increase our poverty if kabalo lang ta magamit, kag kabalo ta mag-secure sa aton mga kwarta, especially sa mga taxes nga ginhatag ta sa government. Next slide please. So, globalization and inequality. Globalization can exacerbate inequality, rewarding the already rich while leaving the poor behind. So it's true that ang rich, gapa-rich, pag but ang poor, they still poor. So the economic gains generated efficient global markets are not always quality shared, and many developing country lack mechanism for ensuring poor people against market failures. Trades, migrations, and intellectual property re- regains, regains at the global level often reflect the greater market power of the rich. So, these negative impacts, it is essential to promote fair trade practices to ensure that benefits of economic growth are shared more equitable and provide debt relief to struggling nations. So additional and internal reforms within developing nations, such as strengthening institutions and investing in education and infrastructure, and crucial for sustainable and equitable development. So um we need to be we need to have ikat na lang dagi. Okay na lang to gi. Gasagit ako.
Ara! Naman, gaulat ko di
Tama na to. Sige lang. Last one, may idugang ko gali.
Bright morning, everyone. I, Miss Maria Angelica Elango, together with Miss Bulibule, will going to tackle our next topic, which is under the global economic structure. So when we say global economic structure, this refers to the interconnected systems and networks that govern international trade, finance, and economic relationship among countries. So this refers to those interconnected systems, mga policies, regulations, as well as organizations nga in charge or ga-facilitate sang trade, finance, and economic relationship among countries. So this interconnected systems is very important for a certain country, no? Because if there is a good relationship among countries because of these systems, the trade, which is the import and export of products, will be much easier, wherein ang economy sang isa ka country will going to rise or there is an economic growth. So I have here an example of global economics structure. As you can see, the World Trade Organization. So this organization has its own purpose and cause. Just like here in our campus, we also have different organizations that are built with different purpose and causes. So, just like this organization, ang iyan naman niya nga cause or purpose is for a trade wherein it aims to reduce trade barriers and promote free trade among its member countries. So, very helpful gini ang World Trade Organization for all the countries when it comes to importing and exporting products or what we call the trade. We have here non-tariff versus tariff or tariff versus non-tariff. So when we say tariff, this refers to the barriers that are taxes imposed on imported goods, while non-tariff barriers are regulatory measures that restrict trade without direct taxation. So, ang difference between tariff and non-tariff barriers is that tariff is there is a direct taxation, while in non-tariff, there is no direct taxation. So I have here an example of non-tariff barriers. First is the quotas. We have here limits on the quantity of specific good that can be imported. Meaning, for example, 5 million worth of goods and services lang ang pwede tama import or export from our country or from another country. So that is a quota of our importation and exportation of goods and services, and that is an example of non-tariff barrier. The second example is import licensing. This refers to the requirements for importers nga need nila i-obtain or i-compile for the permission before bringing goods into a country. For example, is kita as a student, as we want to go in a university or college, they required us with many requirements before ta makasulod sa sina nga university. So, syempre, ang ara nga mga requirements is an example of non-tariff barriers because wala mura siya halintulad ta siya sa isa ka non-tariff barriers because there is no direct taxation. Syempre wala man tax actually, but that is a requirement para makaprocess ang importation and exportations of goods and services. Next is let's move on into talking about deficit and surplus. But before we proceed with deficit, let us first discuss what is a surplus. So I have here a good place to get a quick snapshot of global trade as well as net economic flows in and out of a nation state is by looking at its trade surpluses and deficits. Syempre, as we look at the trade deficit and surpluses of a country, whether exports and imports, we can be able to see a glimpse of that country's economy, whether may ara ba paglago sa ila ekonomiya or wala. Syempre, if there is a surplus of many products or in demand ang products ng isa ka country to other countries, damo countries bi nga naga-avail sa ilang products, of course, we can say that there will be a growth on their economy. Pag-ara namang puro na lang sila import products, meaning it shows that they are lacking from goods and services. So, need pa nila mag-import from other countries, meaning there is a problem. They are facing a problem. I have here a picture. So as you can see, this refers to a trade surplus. So under exports, we have here heavier, while on the other side, we have imports, which is lighter. So based on the picture, what do you think is a trade surplus? Okay, it means that when there is a trade surplus, the exports is heavier or mas dako ang exports while the imports kay lighter ang exports. So, a trade surplus, a surplus in the balance of trade. So, this occurs when the value of the country's export exceeds that of its import. Meaning, mas dako ang gina-avail sang other countries from us. Mas dako nga worth of goods and services ang aton ginapagwa or gina-avail sang other countries from our countries. Exceeds that of import. Syempre, mas gamay ang aton gina-import sa ila because they are exporting much product from our country. So, we have here, trade surplus equals exports greater than imports. Again, ang trade surplus, makahambal ta there is a trade surplus if ang exports is mas dako kaysa sa aton nga imports. Understood? Okay, let's move on. We have here balance of trade equals value of exports minus value of imports. Para makita ta ang balance of trades, we just have to subtract the value of import from the value of exports, wherein ang exports are the goods and services sent to other countries, while ang imports are goods and services brought into the country. Pag exports gani, ginapagwa ta nga products, and while pag imports naman is ang gina-avail ta nga products going to our country. So if the balance of trade is positive, the total value of the country's export is greater than its import. Because for example, export, di ba, buhinan ta sang import. So if ang aton export is worth 6 million nga goods and services, and ang ato naman nga import is worth 3 million of goods and services, syempre 6 minus 3, so may ara pa 3 nga nabilin sa import, so mas export, so mas greater ged ang aton nga exports than imports. Next, we have here an example of a trade surplus. For example, ang Philippines nag-export sila 5 trillion worth of goods of airplane, software, and machinery. Well, ang ilan naman nga imports ng Philippines is worth 3 million lang sang goods or electronics, clothes, and etc. So we have to perform the balance of trade. So we have to subtract the amount of import to the amount of export. So for example is 5 trillion minus 3 trillion. So it is equivalent to 2 trillion, meaning mas dako ang exports kaysa sa imports. So there is a trade surplus. So, again, the Philippine trade balance, ang exports are the electronics, clothes, and machinery coming from the Philippines. Ang imports are the goods and services, but not as much as the export. So, if the trade balance is positive, the total value of the country's export is greater than its import. And also, always bear in mind that even if there is a trade surplus, it is not always positive, because too much or a trade surplus may lead to inflation. So, mapilitan ng isa ka country para taasan ang prices ng ilang products because it is in demand. Dira sila makakita. And the people in that country will suffer from inflation. So, amo naman siya ang problem behind surplus. So, hindi ang surplus always positive, and hindi ang deficit always positive. It really depends on the country's way on handling this trading system. Now, let's welcome Miss Bully Bully.
Bright afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Pauline P. Bully Bully from BTL Ed HE-3A. So now, I'm going to discuss the trade deficit. So trade deficit means a country spends more buying goods from abroad than it earns from selling its product. So, for example, the Philippines often imports more rice than it exports. In this, it is creating a deficit in agricultural trade. So, if this continues long term, it can hurt local industries because they struggle to compete with cheaper foreign goods. So, imagine trade like a weighing scale. On one side, it is export, and the other side is import. So if imports are heavier, that means that's a trade deficit. So this is like spending more money in a store than what you earn from selling. Eventually, you owe more than you own. So the next one is a trade deficit. A trade deficit, also a trade gap. Lugi, kulang, kakulangan, or kakapusan. So trade deficit occurs when imports exceeds exports. So it happens when a country buys more goods or services from other countries than it sells to them, or the country is buying more from abroad than it selling. So example of trade deficit. US exports $2 trillion worth of goods like airplanes, software, machinery. And the US imports are $3 trillion worth of goods, electronics, clothes, cars, and oil. So the trade balance equals value of export minus value of import. So as you can see, $2 trillion minus $3 trillion is equals to negative $1 trillion. So which means that there is a trade deficit, which we can see that the imports is greater than export. So trade deficit doesn't always mean weakness. The US still has a strong technology and services exports. For example, Apple designs iPhones in the US but makes them in China. That counts as an import from China, adding to the deficit. So other example is US trade balance, where US trade balance its import are electronics, clothes, and machinery coming from China, and their exports are goods and services but not as much it imports. If the balance of trade is negative, the total value of the country's import is greater than its export. So we can see that the US buys many iPhones, clothes, and toys made in China, but US sells fewer American products back to China. So the US relies heavily on imported goods, but this keeps consumer prices low. So this means that negative balance means imports exceeds exports. So the China's trade balance. China's trade balance where exports like factories produce electronics, clothes, machinery, etc. and their imports are less compared to what it exports. So China's trade balance it experiences the trade surplus, which it is a positive. The total value of the country's export is greater than imports. So China's trade balance is positive, meaning it exports more than it imports. Like factories in China, they produce massive amounts of electronics and other products. That's why money flows into China. It sells more than it buys. So this surplus makes China one of the strongest economies in the world. So the China also considered as they are the producers or suppliers. So now let's proceed to trade balance relationship. So their economic trade relationship affects the global economy. Why? Because this trade balance sometimes causes tension or worry because the US worries losing money to China while China benefits from selling to US. So we can see here that US and China are the two biggest economies in the world. So the US is the world's top consumer market, while the China is the world's top producer and exporter. So the US and China are like two sides of a coin. One buys a lot and the other sells a lot. The US spends more money on Chinese goods and services, and China also earns money from those sales. So that's why people say that the US is losing money while China is benefiting from the US. So both still depend on each other. The US gets affordable goods and China gets income. So why we need to study global economic structure? So we have here first the economic strength. So we see which countries are rich and powerful. So country with trade surplus often earns more money, making its country stronger or it is called a provider. So in country with trade deficit may depend too much on others, making its economy weaker. So knowing trade flows shows which countries are powerful. So we have here also the job and industries. So job and industries trade creates jobs. So if country imports too much, local factories and workers may lose jobs because of foreign goods replace local ones. So if exports grow, more jobs are created in industries that sell abroad. So trade creates job. So we have here the trade balances shows how countries depend on each other. The global relationship. US and China tightly connected with each other. The US buys a lot from China and China earns from the US. So this affects politics and global stability. Why? Because both of them had benefited each other. So trade links countries can also cause conflicts because the China might think that they are the powerful and the US might think that they are the weaker ones because the imports of the US is more than its exports to other countries. So in terms of currency and debt, large trade deficits can weaken a country's currency and increase debt. Of course, if import is greater than export, it concludes that it increased the debt of a country, and then surpluses can strengthen countries' financial position. So exchange rate affect trade balance. For example, if peso weakens against the dollar, imports become more expensive. So for us to, we need to study
Great
global
afternoon,
economic structure
everyone. So
for
before
us to
I
see
proceed to
who
my
is
topic,
winning or losing in
let me
global
first
trade
introduce
and
myself.
how
My
it
name
affects
is
job,
Nicole
money,
Duracerna from
and
BTL
power
and
and make
HE-3A.
economic
And my
decisions.
topic is all about who are the actors that facilitate economics globalization. So globalization has opened the doors for other non-state authority and actors in driving economic globalization. So this means that globalization is not only driven by government, but also by non-state actors. When I say non-state actors, these are the groups outside the government. So these non-state actors includes international economic organization, the regional organization, the private sectors, and civil society. So now, let us know what is the contribution of each actor to economic globalization. So first, we have the International Economic Organization, International Monetary Fund or IMF, World Bank, and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development or OECD. These organizations are critical in developing and pushing for neoliberal policies among different countries. They also help facilitate trade and development discussion among various states. So just like for example for IMF, if ang Philippines na fall just like for example the IMF is the one that lends money to countries that is in financial crisis and provides economic policies. So if ever, just like for example, if ever the Philippines is in the debt crisis, so the IMF will help through loaning. So ang IMF ma-loan siya for example sa US para mabulig here in Philippines para ma-uplift ang debt crisis ng Philippines. Next is the Regional Organization, Association of Southeast Asian Nations or the ASEAN, and North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA. So these organizations promote regional agreements and standards that facilitate better trade and exchange of knowledge, human resources, and regional cooperation. So just like for example for the ASEAN is the one that promotes peace, trade, and cooperation among Southeast Asian. So just like for example, if the Philippines na igo siya sang super typhoon, like Yolanda. So, ang mga countries nga may connection sa Philippines, just like for example, the China, the Thailand, the Vietnam. So, that country will work together with the Philippines in order to respond and recover from the disaster. That's all. Thank you.
So bright morning everyone. Before we continue to the contribution of each actor to economic globalization, let me first introduce myself. I am Rachel A. Albos from BTL Ed HE-3A. So now let's proceed to multinational companies. So multinational companies, they are considered to be the main carriers of economic globalization. So meaning they facilitate the flow of goods, services, capital, and technology across borders. So we have here economic integration. So in economic integration, multinational companies invest directly in foreign countries by building factories, offices, and acquiring local businesses, stimulating economic growth. For example, Toyota's car factory originally located at Japan. But by integrating economies, Toyota builds car company in the Philippines, creating jobs and boosting the local economy. Next, we have here cultural exchange. So in cultural exchange, multinational companies promote global consumer culture through recognized brands and marketing, influencing tastes and lifestyles worldwide. So, for example, in cultural exchange is the McDonald's. So McDonald's, an American fast food chain, operates in the Philippines. So introducing American fast food to the local culture. So third, we have here technological advancements. So technological advancements, multinational companies invest in research and development, disseminating innovations globally and driving technological progress in various countries. For example, in technological advancement is a Samsung. So Samsung is a South Korean company, invests in research and development here in the Philippines, leading to advancement in mobile technology. Next contribution is central banks. Central banks, they are considered as one of the most powerful institutions in the world's economy since they can lead economic development. So meaning, central banks influence global financial flows and stability by managing a country's currency, money, supply, and interest rates. So first, we have here monetary policy. So we have here monetary policy. So in monetary policy, central banks manage money supply and interest rates to control inflation, promote full employment, and ensure sustainable economic growth. So for example, in monetary policy, so to combat inflation, central bank might increase interest rates. This makes borrowing more expensive, which reduces spending and investment, thereby cooling down the economy and lowering inflation. So during recession naman, central banks might lower interest rates to encourage borrowing and stimulate economic activity. So, balas-balas lang. So, to combat inflation, central bank must increase interest rates. During recession, central bank might lower interest rates. So next, we have financial system stability. So in financial system stability, central bank act as lenders of last resort to prevent bank runs and systemic crises and regulate financial institutions to ensure stability. Example in financial system stability is that during financial crisis. So if a major bank is at risk of failing, the central bank can act as leader of last resort, meaning central bank provides emergency loans to banks facing a shortage of cash to prevent banks collapse. So this ensures the stability of the overall financial system. So next we have economic development. So economic development, central banks provide development finance to support key sectors, promote financial inclusion by expanding banking networks, and support infrastructure development through financing and policy. So, for example, in economic development is that central bank supports agricultural development by offering low interest loans to farmers. Also, central banks implementing policies to promote financial inclusions, such as encouraging banks to open branches in rural areas or providing low interest loans to small businesses. So this expands access to financial services, fostering economic growth and reducing poverty. So which boosts long-term economic development. So last contribution is global civil society. So global civil society as major driver of economic globalization has made its mark in the global development arena, particularly during the UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992. So global civil society includes non-governmental organizations or NGO, advocacy groups, and other organizations that promote social and economic development. So they advocate for fair trade practices, sustainable development, and corporate social responsibility, influencing how businesses operate in global economy. So first, we have here advocacy and policy influence. So in advocacy and policy influence, global civil society promotes policies that address inequality, protect workers' rights, and ensure environmental sustainability. Example in advocacy and policy influence is the Oxfam organization. So this is international organization, which means Oxford Committee for Famine Relief. It works to end poverty and inequality by providing humanitarian aid. So Oxfam advocates for fair trade practices to ensure equitable economic relationships between developed and developing countries. So next, we have promoting global public goods. So also, global civil society, many organizations that work to protect human rights, promote gender equality, and address issues like climate change. So, example in promoting global public goods is that the UNICEF organization means the United Nations Children's Fund. So it works to protect children's rights, promote gender equality, and promoting access to health, nutrition, clean water, sanitation, and education. So last, we have here challenges to economic globalization. Of course, this organization often protests against the adverse effects of globalizations, especially if it hurts people or the environment, and seek alternative ways to make the world's economy more fairly. So, example in challenges to economic globalization is that the World Trade Organization or the WTO. So WTO is a global group that sets the rules for trade between countries. So it helps countries make fair trade deals and solves trade problems between them. Thank you.
Bright morning again, everyone. So now let's proceed to Wallerstein Modern World System. The world system is the result of the increasing interdependence of cultures and ecosystems that were once relatively isolated by distance and boundaries. So long ago, they were separated, but as time passed, different countries, cultures, and societies are linked together by trade, finance, exchange, travel, and also communicating more connected them through technology. The world system is a largely self-contained system with a set of boundaries and a definable lifespan. It does not last forever. it does not last forever, it is because world system has beginning and end. It can change or collapse. For example, Rome. Rome became weak. Ang ila system became weak. So, possible that the Rome system must be changed. Pwede nila i-change kung ano ang dapat maka-improve sa ilang system or pasagdaan lang nila nga ang ilang system is mag-collapse. The world systems have existed before and not a unique feature of the contemporary world. In the past, the system that binds the world together was based on political and military domination. So the strong empires control the weaker areas. Ang strong empires amo ni sila ang political and military. And now, instead of one empire, army holding everything together by trade, finance, and etc. with technology to connect sa other nga countries.
Bright morning, everyone. Before I proceed to my discussion, let me introduce myself first. My name is Horia Di Alyat from BTL HE-3A, and the topic that I will be discussing is the continuation of the modern world system of Immanuel Wallerstein. So the modern world system is also known as the modern capitalist world economy. It is a global economic system based on capitalist principles where economic power is unevenly distributed. So it is a system which relies on economic domination, meaning countries are grouped based on their economic strength and influence in the world market. Countries around the world is divided according to their economic power in global arena. So the world system is arranged according to influence or categories. These are called the three-level hierarchy. First is the core, which is the most dominant. Next is the semi-periphery, and lastly is the periphery, which is the least dominant. So let's discuss first the core. The core consists of the strongest and most powerful nations in which technologically advanced, capital-intensive products are produced and exported to the semi-periphery and periphery. So the core countries hold significant economic power, control key means of production, and dominate high-tech, financial, and profitable industries. So the countries belongs to core is the US, Japan, and Germany. Next is the semi-periphery. It consists of industrialized third world nations that lack the power and economic dominance of the core nations, some were exploiting and exploited. So the semi-periphery countries fall in between having some developed industries but still dependent on core countries. So example of these countries are the South Korea, Taiwan, Mexico, Brazil, India, Nigeria, and South Africa. Lastly is the periphery. It consists of nations whose economic activities are less mechanized or primarily concerned with exporting raw materials and agricultural goods to the core and semi-periphery. So periphery countries have less economic power and usually provide raw materials, cheap labor, and agricultural products to core countries. Examples of these are most African countries and low-income countries in South America. So the reason why Africa belongs to periphery country is because to their historical rules as suppliers of raw materials and labor to colonial powers, creating a cycle of dependency that persists today. Also with the South America, the reason why they belong to periphery countries is because they are characterized by their economic dependence on more developed nations. So the core countries economically dominate others through trade, controlling markets, and exploiting less profitable labor and resources in periphery countries, thus maintaining unequal economic relationships globally. So one of the example is the relationship between the United States, which is a core country, and many developing countries in Africa and parts of Asia which belongs to periphery countries. So the US leads in technology, finance, and industrial production, while many developing countries primarily export raw materials and cheap labor goods. So the US benefits from this unequal exchange by importing cheaper goods while exporting higher value products, maintaining its economic dominance in the global system. So this system is dynamic and characterized by ongoing tensions and competition among countries to maintain or improve their economic position in the world hierarchy. So if you will ask, where does the Philippines belong in this three-level hierarchy? The answer is, the Philippines falls under the periphery country because the Philippines is largely dependent on core nations for economic stability and development. But economically, the Philippines is best described as a developing country and an emerging market. So that ends our discussion for today. Thank you for listening.